The wind was a sharp blade that night, cutting down the narrow street of the border town, rattling the shutters and carrying the smell of wood smoke and whiskey. Lanterns flickered weakly in the winter dark, throwing their glow across a gathering that had the stillness of something cruel about to happen. A wooden platform creaked under the weight of weary boots and heavier silences, the kind of silences where shame is louder than any shout. The auction had gone on for hours, one woman after another stepping forward in thin shawls, faces lowered against the cold and the eyes that judged them. One by one, men raised their hands, exchanged coins, and led their chosen away. When all but one had been taken, the hush deepened. Clara May Hollister stood alone at the edge of the platform. Her hands, pale and thin, clutched the fraying edge of her shawl, though it did nothing to keep the chill from gnawing her bones. Snowflakes clung to her dark hair, melting into strands that framed her face in uneven curls. She was the last bride left, the one no man wanted, and the knowledge settled heavy on her chest like stones. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, not kindly. "She's cursed," someone muttered from the back. Her father drank himself into the grave. "No man should gamble on that." "She's too frail," came another voice, edged with contempt. "Won't last a season on a ranch." Martha Kincaid, the widow with the sharpest tongue in town, made sure her words carried. "Best send her back to the church wagon. Ain't right for a man to waste good money on a sparrow with broken wings." Her laugh, high and brittle, drew more whispers. Clara kept her chin lifted, though her cheeks burned. She would not give them the sight of her tears. She let her gaze wander over the crowd, searching for one merciful face, but found only eyes that looked away. Sheriff Amos Greeley cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably as though her very presence was an inconvenience. "No bids," he declared, ready to dismiss her. "We'll find a place at the mission. Next lot." And then it happened, quiet as the falling snow. A hand rose at the edge of the crowd. It was a steady hand, wrapped in a worn glove, attached to a man who had said nothing all evening. Elias Boone, the cowboy no one much knew, lifted his arm with the kind of simplicity that asked for no attention. He was tall, shoulders stooped from long rides, his coat dusted with snowflakes that refused to melt. He did not look at Clara, nor at the sheriff, nor at the crowd whispering behind their palms. He simply raised his hand and kept it there until Amos grunted, half in relief, half in disbelief. "Well, there it is then," the sheriff muttered. "Boone takes her." The coin exchanged hands with a dull clink, the smallest sum required, but it sealed the matter. The crowd shifted, disappointed there had been no drama. Clara stepped down from the platform, her legs trembling though she forced herself to walk steady. She didn't glance at her new keeper. She could not bear to read pity in his eyes, or worse, indifference. He said nothing as he guided her toward a waiting wagon. His silence pressed heavier than words, yet in its weight there was no mockery. The wagon jolted forward, the horse's breath steaming in the bitter night. Clara sat beside him, her fingers twisting in her lap. She dared one glance. His profile was cut against the night, stern and weathered, his hat brim low, his jaw shadowed by days of stubble. He held the reins loosely, as though even the horse needed no commanding, only trust. She wanted to speak, to ask why, but her throat locked around the question. Snow fell thick, blanketing the prairie in white silence. Clara thought of the Reverend's words last Sunday. "Grace often wears a quiet coat. You'll know it not by its sound, but by its stillness." She wondered if this was grace or simply another chapter of survival written in colder ink. Hours later, a dim lamp glowed ahead, marking the outline of a cabin tucked against a grove of skeletal pines. The place was modest, more a refuge than a home, but warmth pulsed through the cracks of its shutters. Elias pulled the horse to a halt, dismounted, and offered her his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, and warm despite the cold. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, letting him steady her down from the wagon. Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke and something stewing on the stove. The cabin was bare but tidy, with a stove crackling in one corner, shelves lined with worn books, and a single wooden table set for no one. Elias moved with quiet efficiency, placing her bundle on a chair and ladling stew into a bowl. He set it before her without a word, then stepped back as though she might be frightened if he lingered too near. The stew was simple, potatoes and venison, but it filled the hollow ache in her stomach. Clara ate slowly, feeling his eyes flicker toward her only once before he turned to tend the fire. He did not demand thanks, nor offer conversation. His silence was not unkind. It was the silence of a man who lived with the land more than with people. When the bowl was empty, he showed her to a small room. The quilt smelled faintly of cedar, and the window framed the snowfall outside. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, listening to his footsteps fade into the other room. No lock clicked behind her door. No shadow lingered, only the quiet crackle of the stove through the wall. Clara lay down, pulling the quilt to her chin, staring at the ceiling where shadows danced in the lantern light. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Maybe tomorrow I'll learn what his silence means." And with that fragile hope, she closed her eyes, the storm outside raging while, for the first time in many nights, the storm within her heart eased. The days settled into a rhythm as natural as the turning of the seasons, though winter still clutched the land in its cold fist. Clara rose early, her breath misting in the air as she stoked the stove, listening to Elias move about the yard. His boots crunched over frozen ground, steady as a heartbeat. He spoke little, yet every gesture carried meaning. When he left kindling stacked neatly by the door, when he filled her water pail without asking, when he brushed snow from the wagon before she climbed in, she began to understand his language of silence. Though she longed at times for a single word to confirm she was more than a shadow passing through his days. When they ventured into town for supplies, Clara felt eyes follow her. Gossip slithered through the air as easily as smoke from the saloon chimney. Silas Crow leaned against his doorway, his grin sharp as a knife. "Boone," he drawled, "looks like you bought the scraps no one wanted. How's that working out for you?" Laughter followed, men slapping their knees, but Elias gave no reply. He loaded flour and salt onto the wagon with a quiet strength, then offered Clara his hand to help her up. She noticed, with a sting both bitter and sweet, that he did not meet her gaze, but pressed a pair of warm gloves into her lap as the wagon jolted forward. The gloves were simple wool, nothing fine, but they fit her hands like a shield against the cold. She slipped them on and kept her eyes on the horizon, swallowing down the ache of humiliation that had nearly undone her. The storm came suddenly, a white fury sweeping across the prairie. Winds howled against the cabin, rattling the shutters until they seemed ready to tear loose. Snow piled high at the door, burying them in a cocoon of silence. For days they moved in narrow orbits around one another, Elias tending the fire, Clara mending a torn sleeve or kneading dough with cold fingers. The stillness pressed close, yet within it, something softened. One evening, as snow hissed against the chimney, Clara hummed a hymn she half remembered from childhood. The melody trembled at first, then steadied, filling the room with a fragile peace. She thought Elias was lost in his own thoughts, but when the last note faded, she caught him watching her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something gentler than she had ever seen directed her way. Later, by the firelight, words finally broke his silence. "You're not a burden, Clara May," he said, voice low and rough from disuse. "You're here. That's enough." She held onto those words as though they were a rope pulled taut over a dark river. They did not promise affection, nor erase the scars of shame, but they lit a lantern in the shadowed corridor of her heart. Spring did not come quickly. Snow melted in fits and starts, leaving behind patches of mud that clung to boots and wagon wheels. With the thaw came renewed whispers in town. Martha Kincaid cornered Clara near the mercantile, her voice sharp as frost. "You think Boone did you a kindness, girl? Men talk. They say he only pitied you. You'll drag his name lower than your own if you stay." Her words cut deep, for Clara had already feared the same in quiet moments. That night she packed a small satchel, hands trembling as she folded her meager belongings. Better to vanish than be the stone that pulled him under. She stood at the door, the cold seeping through its cracks, when Elias found her. He did not ask where she was going, did not try to bind her with arguments. Instead, he took his own coat, thick and worn, smelling faintly of smoke and horse, and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was wordless, but in its simplicity lay a plea as strong as any vow. Stay. Her eyes burned as she let the satchel slip from her grip. She remained. The next Sunday, the church pews filled with townsfolk, their voices rising in hymns that spoke of salvation but carried judgment in their sideways glances. Clara sat stiff beside Elias, feeling the weight of every whisper behind her. Sheriff Amos made a joke during announcements, his tone careless yet cutting. Boone's got himself a project, Always had a soft spot for strays. Laughter rolled through the room, though hushed quickly under the preacher's glare. Clara's heart hammered. She could shrink into silence, as she always had, or she could stand. Her legs trembled as she rose, but her voice carried, soft yet unwavering. "Sheriff," she said, addressing the room more than the man, "Elias Boone did not take me in because I was stray. He gave me dignity when the rest of you turned your backs, and that is worth more than any coin ever paid." The church fell still, the weight of her words hanging in the air like smoke that would not clear. Faces shifted uneasily. Martha pressed her lips tight. Even Silas Crow looked away. Elias did not move, only tipped his hat as though acknowledging both her courage and the truth she had spoken. When they returned home, dusk painted the sky in bands of violet and gold. Clara lit a lantern and set it in the window, the glow spilling into the gathering dark. It was a small act, yet for her it meant belonging. A beacon that said this was not a place she was merely surviving, but a place she had chosen to stay. Elias, tending to the horses, paused and looked toward the cabin. The faintest smile touched his mouth, as though in that quiet light he saw the beginning of something larger than either of them had dared to hope. And so the story rested there, not with a kiss nor a declaration, but with the steady flame of a lantern in the window and two souls who had learned that sometimes the smallest gestures could hold the greatest weight. For those who have ever felt overlooked, remember this. Even the gentlest hand raised in your defense can change the course of your winter. If you carry that lesson close, you will never again believe yourself unwanted. And if these old Wild West tales stir something in you, then stay a while, subscribe, and let the fire of such stories keep you warm against the cold.